Okay, welcome to class today. Today we're going to continue with our discussion of music fundamentals. And the last lecture, we went over a little bit of the first two videos that you were to see. There was in 4 parts, the Howard Goodall videos. So we looked at melody and harmony. What do we remember about melody? What is a melody? Did you not watch the lectures? Didn't watch them. Okay.
I didn't access Monday's lecture.
I'm sorry?
I didn't access Monday's lecture.
Okay. You're not the first person who told me that. I went through and I made sure they were loaded again. I reloaded them for just in case. So make sure you go through and check those the videos because we talked with the alternating classes. And it just reminded me also of that I didn't speak to you Monday. I spoke to the A section, or is this the A section or B? B. Okay. So I spoke to A, and I haven't spoken to you. So we went over these terms, and make sure you watch the videos, the lectures, so you get caught up. We did a little bit of review of the terms that we discussed or that were in your study guide and that pertain to these videos. And so again, make sure you go through those and catch up, okay? So at least as far as melody, what I did tell the class, or we did discuss, was that melody is essentially just a group of notes, right? But more specifically, a melody is a group of pitches organized by steps and leaps into a recognizable pattern. Okay? If I play a group of notes, I'm sorry. There's a bunch of notes. Do you recognize them? Yes, they're a group of notes organized by steps and leaps into a recognizable pattern. Who hasn't, at one time or another, while you're listening to your favorite song, said, "Oh, I love this part," and then maybe sing right along with it, right? Because you know it. It's a recognizable pattern. And that's what melodies are. And songs are just composed of many melodies. We'll talk about that at another lecture. We talked about scales and a few other things. One in rhythm that I wanted to at least demonstrate with you, and I did in the video, is subdivision, the idea of subdivision. And every beat and pulse can be divided into 2 or 3 or theoretically any number. But generally all we use is 2 and 3 in music. So the so what factor. I try to share that with everything we're talking about. So what? Well, here's a straightforward beat, right? Now let me show you some subdivision, how it's applied in music, especially rock and roll. We'll subdivide this into 2. So I'm taking each one of these beats and playing 2 per beat. And you can feel it. Each beat I'm playing 2 notes. Each beat is I'm using subdivision. Now I can do it into 3 too. You hear that? So what does that do? What's the first thing you noticed? Well, probably that the feel of each of these patterns felt different. And that's really a big part of what it does. But subdivision also does some other neat things. And one of them is it helps keep everybody together. Let me share this with you. I want you to close your eyes, but I want you to pat your hand on the desk or clap your hand and stay with me. Once you close your eyes, okay, I can't hear you. Okay, now let me add some subdivision. Did you hear and notice that as I added more and more subdivision, we got tighter? Because you're better able to gauge, when to actually tap your hands. At first it was just, okay, I think he's doing this. But then when I subdivided into 2, then you can kind of feel a little closer where it is, narrow it down. And then when I went to 4, then you can really tell, right? Subdivision helps us stay together. And generally, every piece out there, especially in popular music and rock and roll, somebody is doing some kind of subdivision. Generally, it's the drummer. And he's tapping on a cymbal or hi-hat or something twice as fast, 3 times as fast as everybody else. That way it helps everybody's listening to that to stay together. Sometimes it can be the piano player, the guitar player. I'm playing all those extra notes and there are subdivisions. You can feel that pulse. You can feel the thing going together. There are many songs where the guitarist is doing the subdivision, that kind of thing. So anyway, so that's what subdivision is. Let's move on to harmony. And we're not going to be able to watch the whole video, but I did want to cover a couple of topics, a couple of points, and amplify them if I could, so we can understand them.
Harmony, we love it. Even its name has been borrowed by everyday language to mean closeness, friendliness, human warmth, cooperation, and well-being. Unlike rhythm and melody, harmony wasn't part of music from the beginning. It's an upstart. It came into life gradually during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. But what an upstart, and how does it work? In this program, I want to lift the lid on harmony, look beneath the surface of this, the most sophisticated and seductive of all music's component parts. Over the ages, philosophers, visionaries, and scientists have suggested that there might be in nature some kind of celestial perfect music, that there might be music in the orbiting of the planets and the spheres themselves. Others have talked of the heavenly music of angels and archangels. Why have they believed this? What aspect of music is it that has provoked such speculation? The answer is harmony. It seems to be more mystical, elusive, and magical than other elements of music. It feels like it's come from some place or time that's beyond our everyday experience. it's tempting to imagine that harmony has somehow floated down to us from heaven, the truth is that harmony has been painstakingly constructed over centuries of human creative endeavour and has allowed composers to manipulate our emotions like no other aspect of music. It has its rules and tricks. It's like a delicate or complicated machine, beautiful clock, say, or a rich and exotic language where every nuance can mean the difference between perfect understanding and chaos. At its most basic, harmony is tension coming together of two or more sounds for pleasant effect.
Okay, that one isn't listed as the term, but I do want you to catch that. The definition of harmony, and that is the intentional coming together of two or more sounds for pleasant effect.
At its most basic, harmony is tension coming together of two or more sounds for pleasant effect. All the world's musical cultures share this idea. In East Asian gamelan music, which has been relatively unchanged for hundreds of years, several sounds may be occurring simultaneously at any one moment.
You hear this music going on. He's calling it East Asian gamelan music, and you hear a lot of notes, right? They're just gling, 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 gling. Anyone ever? We talked about this very thing the other day in class, and it's one of the first scales that you learn. What was the first scale that you learned in the video about melody? I'm sorry? No. He talked about the pentatonic scale. That regardless of culture, though every culture is developed a little bit different, they use different notes. You ever listen to Middle Eastern, call to prayer in the morning, or maybe Indian music? You know, they have notes that they sound a little out of tune to us, but that's because their culture developed notes different than us. We use this, right? And we're used to hearing chords and things, that kind of harmony. That's what we're used to hearing because that's the way Western music developed. But other cultures develop different. And they use a different number of notes between their octaves. Between our octave, we have 12 notes. Then we start again, right? Okay. In other cultures, they use many more. But what musicologists have discovered is that one thing that's common through no matter what culture you're talking about is every culture has at least one thing in common, and that's this 5-tone scale. That pentatonic shape, penta for 5, tonic for tones, 5-tone scale. So every culture uses that at least in their tool bag of melodies or construction. And that's one of the things we talked about in the first video. Well, now I want you to notice that the music that's playing right here with this gamelan music, that's what you're hearing. It's pentatonic. You notice that it all kind of also sounds like wind chimes, right? How many, anybody have wind chimes at their house? You know what I'm talking about though, right? How many tubes do you see hanging down?
5.
Generally 5. And if you see more, it's generally continuing those 5 at the next octave. It's pentatonic. And that's what he's doing here. So, yeah, this... It's kind of a pleasing sound, and that's what they're offering is, you know, that's one culture and one group of notes or tones that are sounded together for a pleasing effect. Different cultures use different ones, but this just happens to be an illustration of what was talked about in the melody video.
But harmony in Western music is doing something else altogether, turning the collision of notes into a deliberate and complex structure of its own. Western harmony began separating off from all other world musics in around the 12th century. And the best way to get to grips with what harmony does and how is to look at that moment of separation, to see what happened when European harmony started to have a mind of its own, when it stopped being merely simultaneous sounds. This is a symphony.
Okay, that actually is an instrument. It's called a symphony. We generally use the word symphony for orchestra, right? But that's what this was called. It's kind of like we talked about the piano originally. It was called the pianoforte. Did we talk about that? Well, terms have changed over the years, but it was called the pianoforte because it could play both soft and loud. The keyboards before it weren't able to do that, and that was an amazing feat and technological advancement of this instrument. It ended up being shortened to just piano, but this is called the symphony, and what you'll see here are multiple strings that go up and down here, right? And there's a crank, and you'll see a wheel right there. And what that wheel is, it's got kind of a resin on it, so it's like a bow across a violin string. It makes it vibrate. And they are tuned, you'll actually see four, so they're tuned at two are one pitch and two are another, kind of like a 12-string guitar. You ever see that? You know, every two strings are tuned to the same pitch. Anyway, so they're tuned to this open fifth, and the harmony you get out from it is a drone. It's a very steady pitch. That's it. It doesn't play any other notes. And so you would accompany yourself, like karaoke, right, with this drone by playing just those two pitches, and you would sing to it. There are other drones that are very popular. Bagpipes use a drone. You may notice that bagpipes, they have that big old bag, but then the pipes just hang down, and there's like 4 or 5 of them, and 2 of them are one pitch and 2 are in another pitch. And so when he's blowing into it, he's actually just blowing air into that bag. Some of the air goes to the pipe, which has a bunch of holes cut in it. Guess how many holes are in there? A lot of them are 5 pitch. They play pentatonic melodies, or 8, because it'll use some notes above and below. But many of the melodies of the old bagpipes are pentatonic melodies. Anyhow, so when you blow into that bagpipe, it's sounding those 2 notes. You still got that constant notes going on in the background. That's a drone, is what we're talking about. That's a very early harmony. We still use it. We still use it a lot in rock and roll. We use it a lot. A lot of rock and roll, a lot of metal. Where would metal be without that open, we play that open fifth? We still use drones.
Ancient European string instrument is kind of a cross between a violin and a sewing machine. The apparently self-perpetuating note it makes is called a drone. Bagpipes do drones as well. In fact, a lot of the world's folk music involves drones of one kind or another. You turn the wheel and make a continuous note, and above it you can play or sing any melody you like. Ye olde ghetto blaster. In this piece, 2 singers sing the melody while 2 sing the drone at a lower pitch. This system of parallel lines gradually disappeared
During the Middle Ages, there was an adaptation, and it was all vocal music, where they would use this drone harmony in chant, and it's called Gregorian chant because it was during the age of Pope Gregory. And that's what was considered very beautiful by the church. And so you'll hear a lot of this old chant music, and it sounds like what was just being played there. So he's likened it to railroad tracks moving in this perfect parallel motion, across the countryside. That's the way that type of harmony worked. And so what we're describing now is how harmony developed. Eventually, it would develop into three-note harmony.
Drone moves independently of the tune. What's important is the way that it shifts from this mini chord to this mini chord. And if you play them one after another like this, you have the beginning of what's called a chord progression. And chord progressions.
Okay, chords. First thing I want you to know is chord is another term for harmony, kind of like the beat and the pulse and the beat. Harmony and chords we're talking pretty much the same thing in Western music, but harmony being, again, the intentional coming together two or more sounds for pleasing effect. And in Western music, we use what's called tertiary harmony. That's chords built in thirds. You're about to get to that. And so, what is a chord's function? What's the so what purpose of chords? Chords are there to support the melody, period. Okay? I played something the other day, and we were talking about scales and keys, and it'd be very different if I did this. Right? We've changed the mode of it because I've changed some of the tones. I've changed the chord below it that harmonizes it. The point is that chords are there to support the melody. Okay? So I'm playing these little three-note chords below the melody, and that's what chords do. They support the melody. What is a chord progression? A chord progression is just a sequence of chords that support the melody. Because melody some of them can be kind of long, right? And so there can be many chords underneath the chord progression, under a melody. So that's all a chord progression is, okay? How the chords progress. And what do they do in there in the first place? They're just supporting the melody, making the melody sound, create the mood for the melody. All right, so where did these notes come from? And that's one of the things we want to talk about.
Not very nice sounding, but it is harmony of a kind. So what is it that determines which chords you use to accompany your melody? In the early days of chordal harmony, they very quickly developed strict, non-random rules about what you should do. And these ideas became deeply entrenched in the minds of composers over the next 500 years. So where did these strict ideas come from? Who determined that there are hierarchies of notes and that each chord should be made of three notes? Well, they weren't invented by some brilliant composer or developed by a committee. Hierarchies of notes were there all along, before we humans found them. Once discovered, their power was harnessed and exploited, and it gave immense energy and drive to Western harmony.
Okay, so what we're about to talk about is harmony and where these notes come from. So let me go back and let's take a closer look at some things that we're going to discuss. The first is where these tones are going to come from and what harmony is. So we've talked about how harmony is the coming together of multiple tones for pleasing effect. We've already know what these notes are. They come from the scale, right? So how do we come up with these three note harmonies that we're talking about, and what are they? Well, again, we know what these notes are, and I'm going to move these letters up here so they're not going to confuse you, right? Because all this are the names of these pitches. We know where middle C is and all the other notes that follow it, because we're just following up and down the scale. And we talked about intervals the other day, and intervals are simply the distance between pitches. Okay? So if we look at the A notes of the C scale, go from C to shining C, C, D, E, F, G, and then we start over A, B, C, right? So if I played C and C again, that would be an interval of a unison because we wouldn't go anywhere. We'd just stay in the same note. But if I played C and then played its neighboring note, D, that's a step away. The interval is a step. But if I start skipping pitches, like going to a third or fourth, a fifth or a sixth or a seventh, that distance from my first note, now these are leaps. Earlier I mentioned that melodies are just tones, pitches organized by steps and leaps. Now you know what I'm talking about. Because the melody, da 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 da, all those pitches, some of them are steps next to each other, da da da. Those are neighboring tones, those are steps. Da 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 da, that's a big leap. Da 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 da, right? There's a lot of notes in between. So that's what we mean. That's what all that means is steps and leaps. There are notes that are next to each other. And in the old days, a lot of music was made like that. Da, 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 da. They're all real next to each other. But then they started using leaps. Well, let's walk that dog a little more. And how did we come up with harmony? And these are some the intervals. The interval of a second, interval of a third. You notice that we've skipped D. And here we've skipped both D and E. And here we've skipped both D, E, and F, right? So these are larger intervals. When you right next to each other, the interval of a second. When you skip one pitch, it's the interval of a third. You skip two pitches, it's the interval of a fourth. You get the idea, right? So harmony. In Western music, we use what's known as the triad. And a triad is simply three notes stacked up onto each other, and they're built in thirds. You see, we've skipped the note D that's in between the C and E. Then we've skipped the note F, and then we have a G. So they're either all on lines or all on spaces. And so what we've done in Western harmony with the 8 notes that we use in scales is we created a chord, a triad, on every step of the scale. And we gave it a name. The 1 chord, the 2 chord, the 3 chord, the 4 chord. And all that means really is the lowercase and the uppercase is whether it's a major and minor. We talked about major and minor the other day, right? That major sounds bright and happy. Minor is kind of somber and gloomy sounding, right? The major scale, that's bright and happy, right? The minor scale, says a little gloomy, softer. Okay, so that's the minor scale, the major scale. So when we play these chords and go from each step, we build these triads. On each of the steps, we're talking about the quality of the chord. The 1 chord is major, it sounds bright and happy. The 2 chord is minor. The 3 chord is minor. Okay, that's all that means. Okay. So, where did these come from? Well, what he's about to share with us is that the idea of doing this or building chords in thirds wasn't something that came from a committee or though there were many committees and councils that had to do with music and many other things in history, but that's not where these came from. We're about to explain it, and then I'm going to bring it all up here and show you how this works.
I'm going to reveal the secret of nature just through the plucking of a harp string. You might think that each of these harp strings gave you one note per pluck. Well, you'd be wrong. Depending on how you pluck it, each string has 2, 3, or even 4 different notes on offer. It's just that the extra ones are in hiding, and if no one told you how to find them, they'd stay a secret forever. What's more, they were put there by nature, not humankind. Catherine will now play some of the secret notes. These hidden notes are called harmonics, and harmonics are what help to create hierarchies in notes and chords. It just so happens that the note B flat, for example, when it occurs in nature, actually has contained within it a spectrum of other notes, just like the invisible colours inherent in natural white light. The existence of these other, barely audible notes gives the sound its rich and full quality. Now let's hear the fundamental note you get when you pluck the string normally. Now Catherine will play the same string with her palm against the string in order to reveal the hidden first harmonic. Magic, isn't it? As a matter of fact, every single note has a whole series of its own harmonics, but the human ear can only pick out the first 3 or 4 in the sequence. A dog or a dolphin might be able to hear more of them, which is presumably why you don't get that many harp-playing dolphins and Labradors, since it must be a rhyming racket to them.
Okay, I wanted to show this particular model because this is probably the most important thing for you to understand about notes and hierarchies and pitch and where we came up with this stuff. Everything that vibrates like this. Okay, it's just physics. This is where music crosses over into physics, the physics element to it. The string, she was plucking on the harp or even a guitar or even this piano, the whole string will vibrate. Yes, but it also vibrates in half. Okay, and it also vibrates in thirds. So what that red line shows is that the white line is the total string. But while it's vibrating up and down, it's also vibrating at its midway point in half. And that is also vibrating at a midway point, and on and on and on, okay? And you'll see the blue line, it vibrates in thirds, and each of those thirds will vibrate into more thirds. Probably, I don't know if you knew that. I didn't know it, but you probably have seen the video of, one of those engineering disasters where they built this bridge out in the Midwest and the wind starts blowing it. Just like blowing on a piece of paper, it's going to vibrate and give you a sound. Well, that bridge started vibrating because of the wind blowing over it. And you notice it was vibrating in the middle and other parts, and eventually it broke, right? It's twisting and torsioning and doing all the other things. But that's just to illustrate in your mind that you've seen this kind of thing before. Now, what happens when we have at those what notes are at those nodes is what I'll call them. Well, those happen to be all these pitches we're talking about. It's in nature that we find these thirds and octaves and fifths and the triads being built. Okay? So what I'd like everybody to do, I'm going to put my mask on, is everybody come up to the stage. And guys, I'm going to need your help holding the piano door open, but I'd like y'all to come here and I want to show you how this demonstrate this phenomenon. if you two would come over here, please. And would you stand back here behind me? And I need you to get up here in front. Okay, you can get behind. Two of you behind. What we're gonna do is we're gonna lift this, but I need, not the whole piano, just the lid. And I need, if you don't mind, would you stand right here? Because I'm gonna need you to hold it straight up. And I want you to get on the back side of it and hold it. Keep lifting, push it up. All the way up. All the way up. Okay, so you two will be behind it until I look over. Make sure you don't let it go anywhere. Okay. One of y'all come over here, please. You're gonna help me out. Why don't you help me? Why don't you stand in this crook? You look like with nice long arms.
Okay.
So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take, by the way, this is a beautiful Steinway piano, some $80,000 to $100,000 piano. It's brand new. The music department, and we're pretty happy about having this. If you'll ever come to one of the recitals, it's exciting, it's beautiful. Anyway, so what we're going to see, we're going to find these harmonics. I'm going to take one of these low strings. You notice that most all the strings, all the notes have like 3 strings. But when you get to the lower ones, they're much thicker and they're longer. That's why we have that long end of the piano, because something longer is a lower pitch, right? Something shorter is a higher pitch. So that's what we're doing here. Now what I want you to do is I'm going to find this note, okay, and I want you to reach over there and feel that string. Okay, oh, you already found a harmonic. Hear that nasty kind of, that's a harmonic. Okay, so what we're going to do is I want you to find the middle of it. And here, before you do this, I'm going to demonstrate. When I play any note, there is a hierarchy of notes that's vibrating. It's vibrating at the middle. So something half its size would vibrate twice as fast, right? So the pitch would be twice as high. And if that's vibrating, again in half, we'll have another one. When I play this note, you can hear these pitches in there very faintly. But there's also some other pitches in there. We start getting to the 5th, you're going to hear this pitch, you're going to hear that pitch, that pitch, that pitch, and as it gets higher, they start getting closer together. Those are what's called the harmonic series. So, what I want you to do is you're going to get back to the middle of the string and we're going to find this pitch. Move this way. Move this way. There it is. You feel it. Move a little bit this way. Move out a little bit. Okay, let go. And touch it in the same spot. See that? Now, what we're going to do is go halfway out again. We're going to go a little farther. A little farther. Maybe the next way. There's that note. Out. We're going to find this one. There's that note. Okay, my point is, you hear all those pitches? They're all vibrating in there. And thank you very much. When that string vibrates, all those pitches are in there. And so all we did in Western music was get a string, another string, and tune it to those first 3. Because they harmonize perfectly, because they're in the harmonic series. We've been using this for ages. When we have chords that are built with tones in the harmonic series, we call that consonant. That consonant, vowels. have notes that don't share the same harmonic series, we call that dissonance. There's a lot of tension in that, doesn't it? Because that one shares the same harmonic series. That one doesn't. And I use more notes now, it does this one. See, that's nice and consonant. That's not. That's dissonant. But it shares a harmonic series with that. You hear how it sounds more at rest? Consonant sounds very at rest. Dissonant sounds very restless. And we love using that. Right? The dissonance between those two vibrating. Or maybe in a slasher movie. Right? We use those things quite a bit, and we use them in ballads and in songs. The tension, then finally release it. Now that nice consonant sound, right? We love that dissonance. We love that dissonance because it creates a little tension and we release it. Just like in movies. We love the story starts out, two nice people, the happy going, then there's some kind of conflict, right? Then it gets resolved. Then there's more conflict. And finally there's, right? And we hope there's a happy ending, but not always, right? Especially in slasher movies. But that's where this comes from. Is the physics of it. When we hear it, it's natural for us when we hear it. It bothers us when the same things, because we hear the collision of things that share harmonic series and things that don't. Or vice versa. Things that don't share, things that do. Good? Okay, would you help me?
So wherever she put a finger, there's a note?
I'm sorry?
Wherever she put a finger?
Well, mathematically, when you divide the string in half and half and half and half, or in thirds and thirds, but understand that what's happening in the whole string, in this half of the string, is happening in the same place as the other half of the string. What's happening in the middle third is happening in the same front third as the back third. So that's why you're able to find so many notes in all these different places and then find them again. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you so very much for your help. Beautiful piano. I love it.
Teamwork, it's good. High five, everybody.
I won.
Here's the code. When European musicians began using chords, the first clusters they started to put together were...
Okay, I'll let you finish watching these videos on harmony to catch the other terms. The last thing I do want to share with you is out of the bass videos, this whole idea of what basses do and just a couple of things about them. A bass. What is a bass's function? As you'll see in the video, an instrument to play bass is actually relatively new. It's only been around a couple hundred years. The string bass, that big one, was only invented in the 1800s. So it's only been around for, it's the newest, one of the newest instruments in the musical spectrum. And so its role is huge, though, especially in rock and roll. Where would we be without a bass line? So what is a bass's role? A bass's job is to play normally the root of a chord. Remember we talked about the 3-note chords, right? The tonic is, let me show you, the root of chords is the one that's red. So the bottom note of all these chords is called the tonic of the chord, or the root. And so the bass's first job is to play those notes. But it's only worth its salt if it plays it at least an octave below. I can play chords all day long, and I've got the root in all these chords, but it's only when I start putting the root way below that now you have that balance, right? That contrast, that anyway, the bass line is it has to play at least an octave below, 1 or 2 octaves below all the other voices for it to be effective. What's its job is to play the root of chords. When it's very common for bass lines to go the opposite direction of a melody. So if the melody's going up, the bass line often goes down. If they go in the same direction, that's called parallel motion. They're parallel, go in the same direction. If they go in the opposite direction, it's called contrary motion. Okay, so understand those terms. The last term I want to share with you is this the walking bass. Walking bass was developed, well, actually long before jazz, but has been used quite a bit since the advent of blues and jazz in the early 20th century. And it's characterized by the steady, scale-like pattern that the bass plays. It plays on the beats. Okay? That's a walking bass line. Everybody got a feel for it? Yes, they use it in jazz. They use it a lot in country too. They use it a lot in many things, even in rock and roll. We'll hear. Okay, that's all I have for you today. Friday we'll go over the introduction in chapter 1 and many of the terms associated in the text. So if you have questions, bring them up during class. Okay? All right. Thank you very much. I'm sorry? I'm sorry. Yeah, only music majors and faculty. But there are pianos in the practice room to play if you'd like to go to one of the practice rooms and play.
It's so beautiful. Have a good day, sir.
Thank you.